Welcome to Conversations, where today we have the Reverend Laura L. Wade, who completed her 34-year career as a school counselor this past June and immediately fulfilled her call into full-time pastoring. Laura is the pastor of two churches in upstate New York, St. Luke's Lutheran Church in Sydney, New York, and Christ Lutheran Church in Norwich, New York. In her last years as a school counselor, the door opened and the path was lit for Laura to attend United Lutheran Seminary in Philadelphia and Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. This began a journey almost 50 years in the making, proving that you are never too old to start becoming new when God is walking beside you. Laura is the mother of 3 grown children and 3 sweet dogs. She lives in a small cabin on an acre of land in the middle of the forest where she finds solace and feels God's presence every day. Reverend Laura Wade, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Thank you. Thank you. I'm good. Thanks.
I call you Cousin Laura because you are my cousin.
Yep. We are cousins.
Well, this is awesome to have you here. I've been trying to get you in this seat for a while.
I know. I've been trying to hide from you.
Too bad. Don't hide from me. Oh. Well, we are here today. We're going to talk about your becoming, because your becoming really has been a journey. Mm-hmm. And part of that journey, as I mentioned in the intro, was as a school counselor. So how did you get into school counseling?
I started my career right out of undergrad at a little college in upstate New York called Hartwick College. And I worked in the admissions office for the 4 years that I was there. And when I graduated, I was offered a job as an assistant director. So I started in college admissions. And as I sat and talked to kids as they were coming out of high school and going into college, I found that I was more interested in what they were going through in high school than I was in where they were headed in college. And so after 3 years of doing that, I went back to school and got my master's degree in school counseling. And I started my career at 26 years of age in 1988. And that was also the year that my eldest child was born. So that was fun, doing my master's degree and having my first child.
A little joke
and started working in January of 1987 in the field, and then worked there for a while. And then when I had my third child, I went out on maternity leave for 6 months. That turned into 10 years. So when I came back, I was an middle school and elementary counselor for that number of years, and then was out for 10 years, and then went back into the field as a high school counselor, which is really what I loved. I loved it, and did that for 17 years.
Maybe that's your redo.
That was my redo, to help kids like me.
Yes.
And my brothers. And yeah. So I loved it. I did it for 16 and a half years at the place that I retired from.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah. I loved it.
You talk about, your call, and did you see this as a call, the school counseling?
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Like so many other things in my life, it just was the thing that happened. I didn't fall into it, but the path was lighted. And it ended up being the absolute right place for me to be, because I just love kids, and I just, wanted to spend my time helping kids that I couldn't help when I was younger. And as an adult in the education system, I had more of an opportunity to really make a difference in people's lives. And so that was my call. In high school, I loved math and science, and thought that I'd be going into something having to do with math and science. Those were my best subjects. And that isn't the path that I went on at all. And I jokingly told kids that I was helping to decide what their next step was after high school, not to put a lot of stress on themselves or pressure on themselves, because the only class that I failed in college was Psychology 101.
Oh my, see,
See, you
it
just
must be
never
a
know.
family thing. Now, okay, I have a doctorate. It is not in psychology. I failed it. I had to take it 3 times. And the
Yeah.
way I saw it was, kind of looking back, is that it's so
Mhm.
broad.
Yeah.
I think I like things that are not so broad. I like to dive
Yep.
deep into things and
Yep.
understand. The other psych courses I took following that, I was fine. I got
Yep.
wonderful grades. But for some
Yep.
reason, 101, there must be a redesign that needs to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was so focused on the functioning of the brain. And
Hmm.
as an 18-year-old, I didn't really care.
Yeah, me neither.
But now I love the research, the MRI research and the research on the physicality of the brain, as well as the psychology of the brain. So it was, yeah, if I took it now, I'd ace it, but I failed it
I
my
think
freshman
maybe
year
we
of
should
college.
take it again.
Maybe, maybe I should. Yeah, so that's the path that led me to school counseling. And it was just a great career until it wasn't anymore.
Well, it wasn't. Well, God had a plan,
Yeah,
and his
most
plan always
definitely.
comes to fruition. And so I
Hmm.
remember when you were young, you were always very active in church.
Yep.
And so how do you go from that, growing up in the church,
Hmm.
becoming a school counselor, and then a ministry leader? Here you are today.
Hmm.
So what does that
Hmm.
look like for you, that journey?
So I had said that it's 50 years in the making, because it is. I loved being in church. And you and I were raised in the Roman Catholic Church. So a lot about the Roman Catholic Church, that the doctrine that I didn't agree with even as a little kid, but I love, and I had a wonderful priest growing up. But I just Father John Hayes, and I wanted to be on the altar. And I was 9 years old when I asked him, when can I become a priest? And he, sadly said, "I'm sorry, honey, but you can't be a priest."
Mm.
But he put me on the altar, and he made me an altar girl. And I was the first altar girl in the Rochester Diocese. And yeah,
I
and
didn't know
he, yeah. So I started serving with my brother Daniel, um, on the altar. I got to ring the bell. Any Catholics will understand what that is. Um, and I served until I went to college. And my college friends, remember me going to church on Sunday mornings. And they didn't. And it's just, I always loved being in church. I grew up in a community where the church wasn't ever locked. And I remember my friends and I would be out riding bicycles and going swimming and, hanging out. And I would go into the church and I would just sit there. I loved the quiet. I loved hearing the birds chirping outside of the church windows, but everything inside was so still and so beautiful. And I just always felt that God was with me. Um, and so in my 20s, I thought I would love to be a pastor. And I remember for most of my adult life, when I sat in church and listened to sermons, I would always create a sermon in my head that I thought would be better. And so I'd always been doing that, and just thinking about what was said, and thinking, well, that wasn't so good, and creating something better. Not that I preach all that great now, but I was always thinking about it. And I approached a pastor in my 30s, saying, "How do I become a pastor?" And he took that as, this is when we were raising our children in the Episcopal Church. And he took that to mean that I wanted to do the things, become a lay minister and do the things that he didn't want to do. And so I never got, I've got something flying around here. I never got the, the serious answer of how I could become a pastor. And so I was busy with my kids. I was staying home, full-time mom, 3 kids, husband traveling all the time, pretty much raising them by myself a lot of the time, and thought, okay, well, that's just not my path. And so I just kind of went on. And so I put it away, didn't think anything of it. And then it just keeps coming back up. You know, it just every once in a while it would just keep coming up, keep coming up, keep coming up. My When my husband's and my marriage was falling apart, we decided the priest who married us, the Episcopal priest who married us, came to this church that I'm sitting in right now at St. Luke's. And so we decided as a family to come here because she married us. So we could talk to her and whatever. So I became a member of this church. The marriage didn't last, but I continued coming. And that pastor who married us was the first person to say to me, you have to go to seminary. Wow. And she started putting me in leadership roles within the church. And then she moved, she retired and she left. And I became a leader for the call committee for the new pastor. I was on the church council. I was doing things, leadership in the church, but never could see a path for ordination. I still had kids at home and in college. I was now living on my own. I had a job that I had to go to every day. So I couldn't just pick up and go to seminary. And the Lutheran seminary, one campus is in Philadelphia and one campus is at Gettysburg, the seminary, like on Seminary Ridge. I decided that I was going to get a degree in social work, a master's in social work, with the idea that I'd become a private therapist when I retired. And I was halfway through the program and in an internship that fell apart halfway through, fell apart. And it happened behind my back. I had no idea that it was coming. I got called into the office. They said, your site has been canceled. And I fell apart because that was my plan,
your plan
for my future.
But God.
And I was going to do it all myself. And on Wednesday before Thanksgiving, I had that meeting. And on Sunday, this pastor approached me and said, the new pastor approached me and said, have you ever thought about seminary? And I said, well, yeah, but I can't do this. And he said, here's a plan. And I had to be recommended by a pastor. I had to be supported by the bishop, and went into what was a certificate program that led to a master's degree program. But I could do part of it online. Once in a while, go to campus for 1 week intensive classes. And over 3 years, I did my seminary work, and was ordained on November 2nd, 2019. So yeah. Just no way that I could have ever planned it myself.
I remember when I first heard that you were going to seminary, and it didn't seem odd to me. It just seemed like, because
you know God, and you know how God works. Yeah. So it just wasn't, I truly, I'm envious of the people who go in their 20s and they have, a whole career ahead of them and whatever. But I recognize that wasn't my path. That wasn't the path that God had ordained for me. And I truly believe that my calling as a school counselor was my first calling, because there just are a lot of kids who need that kind of support. So it's happened at the right time.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk about, you mentioned leadership and being within leadership, during this journey of yours. And we're going to talk about some of, bridging of those skills. But I wrote something down here that you talked about the other day, which is foresight faith. And I'm wondering if you can touch on that.
So the thing that I had said to you last week was I wish that like I see people who have faith that they just walk forward into the darkness and they are confident in God's presence and that God will provide. The strength of my faith has often come when I look back and say, wow, look what God did for me back then. Look where God was. Um, and, and, and my goal for myself is to have foresight faith rather than hindsight faith. Not that you can't have hindsight faith, but I think that the strength that we get from God and the power of the Holy Spirit has to be in foresight, because you can't keep walking forward without being absolutely sure that that you are not alone. And it's what I preach. So, and I see people in my congregation whose faith is so much stronger than mine. And I think I have a pretty strong faith, but like they just give it to God every minute of every day. I can't even begin to express how grateful I am for the women, so especially the women in my churches. They're some of the most devout, some of the strongest people I've ever met, and have gone through some pretty serious stuff in their lives. Oh, and I believe with everything in me that God puts people in our paths, and in our circles, um, and recognizing the reasons why they're there is an important part of faith as well. Yeah.
That takes reflection. And
Yeah.
and a lot of people that I speak with and the work that I do, they don't hit the pause button and reflect.
Right.
And that doesn't mean you have to journal. That doesn't
Right.
mean you have to take a weekend or, go into meditation for hours and hours, but it is about just taking a moment and
Right.
recognizing and appreciating.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think we're called to do that. Our Bible provides that for us. Um, and every time you read a passage, depending on where it is in your life, you're going to read it a little differently
Yes.
than you did the last time. And it's all about reflecting on ourselves and where we've come from and what we've endured and what we've accomplished. And yeah, yeah, yeah. Taking a moment to pause is really important because you can't hear God's voice
That's right.
unless you do. God speaks to me when I'm in between sleeping and waking. That's when I hear it the most. That's when I get my ideas for my sermons, when I have an idea for a sermon, how it's developed. It's always between that waking and sleeping. And it's usually between 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock in the morning, because it's so quiet. The dogs are sleeping. The crickets have stopped making noise. The birds haven't come up yet. It's the quietest time of the day. And although I'm not a morning person and I hate getting up in the morning, I'm usually awake at some point during that time. And that's where I feel that presence, that voice, that whatever you want to call it the most. I think people who are, we're not Moses. We're not going to hear the booming voice. But we can hear God speak to us inside of ourselves.
And having that awareness. I mean, you're
Yeah.
aware of that. I think,
Yeah.
and it takes, like you said, that reflecting and having
Yeah.
that awareness to know. And I know that if something comes to me like in those hours, if I don't write it down, I may lose it
Absolutely.
by the time I wake up. And then it was like,
Yeah.
it was so good. I
How was
told myself I was going to remember it, and it may come back to me, but I
Yep.
know myself. And if I don't have something right by my bedside and write it down, it could be gone, or put something on my phone, a voice text to myself.
Right. Absolutely. That's what I have to do too, because I'll it'll come to me in just the right words
Mhm.
And if I try to recall it, I can't, because I'm doing it through my own brain,
That's
not through God's voice.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. All right, let's get to that leadership. And I know,
Oh,
like I said, you talked about that, and so many people I speak to, they
mhm,
don't see themselves as a leader, but I know that you
mhm,
do. And so
mhm,
let's take just a moment, and why don't we see about taking those leadership skills that you know that you have and that
mhm.
you've implemented and bridge that with the two careers that you've had.
I think that there's a lot of crossover, because I'm working with people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I'm not an aggressive leader. I'm not, I wouldn't even, I would say that I'm assertive, but I'm definitely not aggressive. And I think that my best skill is being able to listen to people and to accept people for who they are and where they are in their own journeys. And I think that if you if, if you try to impose your own beliefs and your own, even as a pastor, sitting in the I would assume that everybody in the Lutheran church would have the same thoughts and ideas about things, and it's absolutely not true. So even as a pastor, the thoughts and ideas of people in the congregation vary
Mm-hmm.
vastly. So I think just being able to meet people where they are at is the first step. And for whatever reason, inside my head or in my experiences or whatever, I've always been able to accept people for who they are, and where they're coming from, and understanding that experience creates belief or disbelief.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we all come from such different places and such different experiences. And so we don't experience the world in the same way. So it was definitely easier with kids. Um, I found that my struggle in school counseling wasn't with the kids. It was with the adults who are making decisions for kids.
Right.
And if what was at their heart and their desire, if it wasn't what was best for kids, then I had real difficulties with those people. Dealing with adults in a church setting can be challenging. And when you're talking about churches, you're talking about places where pastors come and go. When those transitions happen, they go a period of time without a permanent pastor. And so the people who have been in the church for a very long time know exactly what they need to do in order to bridge that gap. But having a new pastor come in is very difficult every single time, because pastors tend to come in with ideas of what they want to do in their churches, cause conflict with their congregations. Some people will come in and other people will leave. And my situation at the first church that I was at, while I was a pastor and a school counselor for 5 years. I did both, part-time pastor, full-time school counselor. So that kind of evolved because I grew with them, they grew with me. I learned from them, they learned from me, because they were supporting me while I was in seminary. So that's a very different dynamic than the church that I'm sitting in right now, because this church has had a history of long absences of pastors. And there are a lot of cooks in this kitchen. So, how I'm leading here is listening and
Mhm.
accepting people for who they are and where they come from before I make any steps to make any changes, because there has to be healing in the community. And there's so many dynamics that go into it's church is a family.
Yes.
It's a family. And and the difference between it being functional and dysfunctional is their ability to hear each other. And so and for them to accept each other for who they are and where they come from. So I tend to not be the kind of person who comes in and says this has to be done my way, because it doesn't. I mean, realistically, it doesn't have to be done my way. I can learn as much from them as they can learn from me. And the dynamic of how my job is to bring them together as a functioning family under a spiritual banner. So that has, and you'd expect that everybody understands the great commandment, love God and love your neighbor as yourself.
Oh, no,
the part that gets left out when you talk about love God, all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself, we tend to stop at love your neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
And we leave off the as yourself. If people don't love themselves, they can't love each other.
That's right.
And so when you bring these people in and you're trying to do functions and you're trying to operate as a community of faith, you've got all this hurt that people are living with, and joys and whatever, but it seems to be the negative things that cause them to behave badly towards each other. There are some things that
people hurt people.
People hurt people. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, God doesn't hurt people. People hurt people. Yeah, yeah. So I don't think that I have any leadership skills that I could list saying, this is what we have to do to lead through, whatever. It's not an outward leadership style. It's an inward leadership style, helping people to see themselves and what their value is, and listen and reflect back to them. But it is, there's just a lot of hurt. There's a lot of hurt. And there's a lot of hurt in the world. And when people come into church, they want to feel good. They want to feel better when they leave.
That's right.
So there's that part of it, but then there's the polity of the church as well, that make it a little challenging at times. But I think that communication skills are the most important thing in leadership, because as long as you are able to communicate with people, then you can adjust your leadership style based on what you find that they need. So that's really, like, I think I'm very different in both of the churches because there are different things that need to be done. Yeah. And the other church
skills are crucial. The things that you're listing, those soft skills, too many times in leadership, people are thinking about, yes, numbers and financials and all that is really important to keep a church going.
Yeah.
You also need to have those understandings. That's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I'm organized and I need to have organization around me. And so I do kind of gravitate towards the people who have organized thinking. It doesn't mean that I can't work with people who don't have organized thinking, but I can't work in chaos. So that's where I kind of draw things in and try to, once I get to know people, what their skills are, so that my job isn't to lead all the time. I lead when I'm in front of the congregation. That's my job in the congregation. My job is to figure out what skills other people have and empower them to use those skills so that everything is rounded out. That's right. Because you can only lead being the only leader for so long.
That's tiring.
Oh gosh, yes. And I don't want it.
No, we need to raise people up. I mean, God embedded gifts into people for a reason.
Right. And God calls imperfect people. All the way through history, God has called imperfect people. Thank God for David. Yes. Thank God for Abraham. Thank God for all of those people who we can marry. And Mary, there was nothing extraordinary about Mary. Mary said yes. There's nothing extraordinary. We don't know what Mary's character was like, except through the Magnificat, except for her saying yes to Gabriel. We don't know anything else about her, but if you say yes, then God gives you what you need.
Right.
And that is, I don't have to have all the answers going into a situation, but I do need to listen. I need to learn about the people around me. I need to figure out what their gifts are. And they could have gifts that they're not willing to share. And so I have to take that into consideration too. The best leaders empower the people and recognize gifts and empower people with those gifts, and then stand back and let them work it out.
Yes.
But when something goes wrong, it comes back on to the leader.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not about just leaving people to themselves and saying, "Oop, not me, you did it." Ugh. It's about it coming back and taking on the responsibility as the leader. That's part of the job. Yeah. It's not an easy part of the job, but it's part of the job.
That's right. And you said yes to the job. Just like Mary said yes. And that's part of leadership. It's raising your hand and saying yes, and prayerfully, making the way, and that the Lord will make the way for you.
Right.
With work.
Yeah. If God brings you to it, he'll give you what you need to get through it. Yeah.
Well, Reverend Laura Wade, it's been a fantastic time having you here. I appreciate you so much. I appreciate your leadership. It's been fun because I've known you since I was born.
Right.
And to watch you along the way, and really to see this, almost 50-year journey, and watching it continue. I look forward to that as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for talking me into this.
Oh, absolutely.
It's funny when you have to answer those questions. It also helps to define for me what things are valuable to me, because I've never had to answer those questions before. It's just always one of those things that just kind of roil around in my head. But yeah, you got to be quiet and listen to God. Yeah.
Well, you keep doing great things, and we will see you soon.
All right. Thanks, Kelly.
All right. Bye-bye.